Welcome to the New Monastics Podcast, where we'll be discussing all aspects of the contemplative life and interspirituality in the context of modernity. On each episode, we will choose a topic to explore with one of today's leading teachers or thinkers. The New Monastics Podcast is a project of Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, which is dedicated to the emergence of a newly conceived contemplative life of embodied spirituality and sacred activism. Welcome to the New Monastics Podcast. I'm Nathaniel, co-founder of Charis Foundation and dialogue partner for our guests.
And I'm Daniel, the host for the show.
Today, we've invited my teacher and friend, Robert Wing Sensei, a student of Aikido masters Koichi Kashiwaya Sensei and Hiroshi Ikeda's Shihan. Wing Sensei is director of Wise Actions, an organization dedicated to cultivating compassion and transformative actions in the world. He's the founder of the Mountain Warrior Institute and Warrior of the Heart seminars, each designed to help individuals and groups to live and work wisely, skillfully, and courageously. Wing Sensei is the founding teacher of the Aikido courses at Naropa University and now continues to lead the Aiki Sword and Staff Club on campus. He is also a respected sculptor and painter and has trained extensively in Traeger psychophysical integration.
Welcome. We're so happy to have you on the show.
Glad to be here.
Nathaniel, do you want to start us off with just sharing a little bit about how y'all know each other?
How I know Bob-san, Wing Sensei, it must go way back. We were in the same community in Boulder for many, many years, especially connected to my teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And over the years, I would be at events, and Bob and his wife, Rue, were always there in the community and would just kind of run into each other. And Bob was also a body worker, that was trusted by Reb Zalman. And so when Reb Zalman needed an attunement, he might come to Bob. And I know they shared a rich dialogue through the years. And then the last, 5 years, as I was wanting to kind of check back into my own relationship to Aikido, which I'd trained in for a while, it occurred to me I knew a sensei that I could work with. Just hadn't clicked before then. And so then Bob and I started to connect around just doing private work together, especially with sword and staff, Boken and Jo. And it's one of the great pleasures of my life is to spend time with him working on these things. I get to see him also on campus at Naropa University, often working with students, and I can drop in every once in a while. And it's a great break in my day when I can do that.
That's great. Wing Sensei, how is Nathaniel as a student?
He's great. The main thing is I like students that are honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I like students that ask hard questions, whereas a British friend of mine likes to say wicked questions. So Nathaniel does both.
Can you share one of the questions that is challenging that Nathaniel has asked you?
There's different ways of asking questions. So a while back, I took a course and they presented viewing communications in 3 different ways. One was representational, which is what we're doing now, kind of speaking. So the words represent something, they're not what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is immediate, which is the sound or the word actually conveys what it means without needing to be translated in our brains. Those would be like sounds that any human being in the whole world would recognize, like ouch. Everybody knows that because it's immediate. And you don't have to translate it. And then the other is structural language, which doesn't have to be translated either. So it'd be like you put your hand up and you say stop. That's going to be the same anywhere. So Aikido really is more than anything else a structural language. So I'm saying all that because looking back on a lot of the things I've done in my life really involves structural languaging. And so a lot of the questions that Nathaniel asks is structural language. So some of the best students also have a lot of self-criticism.
Mm-hmm.
So that conveys doing something and then huffing and puffing about what they did wrong.
This is me.
And that's a question, actually.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm present and that's happening, it's like I take that as a question.
Yeah, it reminds me in the practice of push hands and Tai Chi, we speak in the same kind of language of asking questions with touch. When you push somebody gently in one direction, you're asking a question.
Yeah.
Kind of, are you open here? Do you want me to go here? Is there tightness? And listening for the answer in a physical, direct sense.
Yeah. The club at Naropa is really Aikido principles. To me, it's got to be taught in a structural language and in emotional language too. Part of Aikido for me is how to deal with anger and violence, but taking micro doses to practice with.
Mm-hmm.
But with the question thing, I'm a firm believer in questions too. I remember telling somebody, there's a lot more I could teach you, but you haven't asked me.
Mm.
And it sort of, I think, went over their heads or something. Because I think, it seems like a lot of students, they're not used to challenging. Asking questions in a way is challenging the instructor. But that's the best. And I remember being interviewed by a journalist student from CU. And she was asking me questions off of a list. And I just said, why don't you just ask me what you really want to ask me?
Mm.
And she couldn't come up with anything. It's like, I took it as she never thought that she could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the best teachings come out when neither one of us, the asker or the answerer, knows what the answer is going to be.
It also suggests that she may not have been engaged with herself, with her own process, where questions are coming up, so there's like engagement with the other that's across from you, but also engagement with yourself in watching your own questions arise. And you can be disconnected from both, and depending on that questionnaire or list of questions, and not actually be having a conversation. Again, this is about connection in the martial arts too.
Yeah.
Well, and this is a direct lesson for me because I just was looking at a list of questions. So now I'm like, throw that out the window. Let me just ask the real questions that are coming up, and I will disregard the plan of questions.
Good man.
I guess just to restart and rewind a little bit. For those who might not know anything about Aikido, can you share just a little bit about what Aikido is, and as a martial art, what does it mean to be an internal martial art?
Yeah, what comes to mind is I had a teacher once. He said to me, I can't throw you across the room, but I can lead you to wanting to fall across the room. And so to me, that's the internal part. And Aikido, for those who don't know, it's sort of outwardly, it looks like, the practice traditionally is you partner up with somebody and they attack you 4 times, 2 on each side, and then you throw them or you respond to them, and then you reverse roles. In real traditional dojos, there's a lot of throwing and falling involved. That's not what I'm doing right now at Naropa, because I like working outside, and it's harder to learn that outside, but it's also, it limits the people who can study, having to fall all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say that where I've used Aikido physically the most is in falling and rolling and being okay. So there's a lot of value in that. Getting back to that, the internal, so there's that aspect of being able to lead on a subtle level. There's also the aspect of not losing yourself in reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's an internal process. And I had another teacher that really kind of emphasized you should be able to be peaceful in the most chaotic, unpeaceful place. That's your practice.
Yeah.
And in Aikido, the physical practice would be somebody would attack me at an appropriate level of dynamism, of dynamic, of force, depending on what we were practicing. And then I would, most of all, practice not losing my inner peace. And that's a continual practice, which I get often driving, by the way. So you can practice it anywhere. And then the internal part becomes how to do an appropriate response to what's going on without being drawn into the violence or the aggression that's happening around you, because it would be so easy as a human being to respond to somebody trying to hit you with hitting them back. Mm-hmm. And then you've lost your kind of inner peace, unless you've practiced hitting people with inner peace.
Mm-hmm. So maybe, Bob, you would say something about, the word Aiki, how that's related.
The word Aiki is from Aikido. So Do means the path, the way. In Chinese, it's Tao. So same character, same idea. And Qi is in Chinese Qi. So it's the same. It's energetics, but it's much more than that too. At least in Japanese, they would call the weather, the sky Qi, the weather. Mm-hmm. So it has a lot of different influences, but basically we translate it into English as energy. And more commonly than not, it's translated as harmony. But the character itself, the kanji, the character, is originally a picture of a bowl with a lid on top. And it's the harmony of how the lid fits. So good eye is like a lid that fits really well. Not too tight, not too loose. Mm-hmm. So the older, and not just older, another maybe even more accurate way of translating eye is fitting well. So it kind of, to me, references how do you learn to fit your energy and yourself well into any situation that's happening.
Is that the same I that is in Ma'ai when we talk about effective distance in martial arts? How we fit well together positionally?
Yeah. So Ma'ai means proper distance. Proper because it fits well with what's going on. Sort of like when we shake hands with somebody, you step forward to shake hands. Right? You have to physically, but then usually you take a little step back after you shake hands because it's too close. So it's proper ma'ai to shake hands, but if you stay there, it's no longer proper usually. And then you can also notice that with different people, you might adjust your distance a little bit, depending on how you feel, how they feel. If somebody's acting really aggressively, you naturally take a little step back, unless you freeze, right? So a lot of that is training not to freeze, to keep responding and being appropriate. So if somebody is being really aggressive, you usually take a step back. And then in Aikido, you also learn how to, more than take a step back, take a step in and join with, which is the hard practice, right? And what's the best way to join with somebody who's being aggressive without freezing, without being aggressive yourself? I mean, to me, that's in a way the essence of, at least what I know of Buddhism and of Christianity, that's the structural language of compassion, being able to join with. And once you join with, then you can lead better.
As I've gotten older, when I was first training in Aikido, I wasn't young, but I was still young enough to really be doing hard physical practice. And as I've gotten older, I became more and more interested in the Aiki principles. And I was always interested in this, but then maybe it became necessary to become more interested in the principles and how and where they apply everywhere. And so you just use the example of a handshake and the kind of important relationships. It's important to step into a handshake, but it's not important to stay there, or not appropriate to stay there and to step back. And even when I was first training, a really great guy, Mark Reeder Sensei, would talk to us like, you can practice your Aikido when you're opening a door. There's a right approach to opening the door. There's a way to step back. And open the space. And then very quickly, I was using that in board meetings where I was feeling attacked and I was getting off the line, as we say in Aikido. I was stepping out of the direct conflict and I was letting energy go past me. It made a great deal of difference to how I experienced these things. So I'm wondering about talking about Aiki principles that apply to your entire life. And a lot of what you do with students, especially on the Naropa campus, is use the sword and staff and how they hold and behave with them to illustrate how they're showing up in life and how they meet a moment. And maybe if you could talk more about, the why of that and how that's become important to you and the work you've done around that.
This isn't exactly true, but in Japanese arts, at least when I first started, it was conveyed to me that there's the art of Aikido, which is a life path of learning, and there's an Aiki-jitsu, and that's just the techniques, just the self-defense. It's not exactly true, but in practice, there's a martial art technique, but what you're talking about is the life technique. And to me, martial art technique has, a purpose, and it's good to know. But the life technique is something you can do your whole life, and you keep studying. It's like I keep studying. That's why I like working with students. It's like when something comes up and I say something and I internally I go, Bob, listen to that. Yeah, you needed to hear that. It came out of my mouth, but it was sort of like, no, I needed to hear that. To me, that's the most important part. And, for many years now, I've been teaching the principle on not the martial art, what I would call the jitsu part, so much. And it partly came out of, well, we train in Aikido and you're a student. And then some people become teachers. So in the old Western style, it's like apprentice, journeyman, master. Right? So you're an apprentice. And then some become masters. But when do you get to be a journeyman? Right? When do you get to practice? And the ideal is you never practice the jitsu in your life, because if you're doing it right, you don't fight. You don't end up in a conflict. I had a teacher once say, I asked him about really fighting, and he said, if you're really fighting, you're not doing Aikido. Mm-hmm. And there's another sensei that like to say, somebody would say, Aikido's not good for fighting. And then her response would be, yeah, Aikido is really good for not fighting. And so the ideal is, even in a conflicting situation, won't fight. But then when does that happen in life? If you're anything like me, every day, but emotionally, or I misstep on the stairs and I can recover. Well, that's good Aikido practice. Opening the door. Depends on how you do it. Or when a neighbor unjustly complains about my noise, it's like, do I get upset, or do I think about, well, what is it that I really want to accomplish here? And what's the best way? So I can feel the emotion, but I don't have to let that drive me. And I like to say the emotional part is important, but that's like your horse that you ride. And you don't want the horse to ride you. You want to ride the horse. So there's power in that. But you got to have the reins on it.
Yeah, and it seems like from what you're saying that part of this practice is the stepping in and turning a situation, whether interpersonally or personally, that is a conflictual situation, engaging with it in such a way that it transforms the conflict into an opportunity for meeting, for transforming, in a way, turning conflict into a non-conflict by the way you engage with it. And this kind of counterintuitive move of stepping in and a kind of disarming, again, whether that's in a martial application, but it seems like a lot of what we're talking about is really the application beyond the martial application. So I'm wondering if you can just flesh that out a little bit for us, this method of stepping in to conflict as a means of transforming that moment of conflict.
Right. So what came across my mind is don't step into conflict. It's like you find the space that's not constricting and you step into that. So I remember years ago dealing with, might have been in Minneapolis, I can't remember, but it was a group of men, and they're about half and half, white people and non-white people, mostly black. And we separated. And at the point in that city or something, there was a lot of conflict going on. And where it came out was the one place we could meet was we wanted a good life for our children. Mm-hmm. Most people can agree on that. And then you start disagreeing of what that is, but there's a point of agreement. And that's the place of non-conflict that you step into. While conflict might be swirling around you, but you step into that. Mm-hmm. It's opening, but it's that place of the person's energy is not going to conflict with you, and it allows you to step in. So it's like the open door. So you may have to go around the building and find the open door. They may all be locked, and then you find a window. I'm the type that I'd go through the window. And go ahead, Natano.
I was just thinking of the principle of Irimi Tenkan, where we enter a space which might be compared to the peace at the eye of the storm. That relative space of peace. You enter there, and the Tenkan then is the turn. And so you enter a place of relative peace in there, and then that's also the place where we turn then and maybe begin to transform what was conflict into something else. And so it seemed relevant, that kind of phrase, because you can separate Irimi and Tenkan, but really, as you've taught me, Irimi Tenkan go together. Mm-hmm. And so that was appearing to me too.
Yeah, and Irimi means to enter. And I keep going back to, this has informed my whole life. And like the body work I've done and the other work I've done, I have come to see it in these Aikido terms, because that's been my main practice. And that informs the other practice, which I don't think would have happened if I had only taken Aikido as a martial art, is how to win a fight. Mm-hmm. And for that matter, my first teacher, Kashiwaya Sensei, one of the first things I remember him doing, I think his wife made this up, sent out a single sheet paper, and it was an advertisement for a martial art called Run Fu. And the subtitle, The Ancient and Honorable Martial Art of Getting Ass Out of Way. And then it showed somebody running away. His teaching was, first thought, just get away. Just don't be there. If somebody goes to hit you, don't be there. But the other thing I wanted to say was his teaching was, if you run away, don't run away from something, run towards something. And there's a different energy. Mm. So again, you're entering, you're going towards something. That's a complete different energy than running away from something. Because when you're running away from something, you're still connected to that, like emotionally, energetically. So the teaching was, pick a spot, cross the room, and run to that. Don't run away from it. And then the other thought was, life is always going forward. Can't go back. Yeah. Right? So life is always Irimi. Then you get to choose how you Irimi, how you enter. You got to be entering something. But if you're connected to what you're leaving too strongly, it really affects how you enter into where you're going. To me, that's the important teachings. And then back to the how to be a journeyman, how to use this in life. You don't go around looking for fights. You go around living your life and then applying the principles. Applied emotionally or structurally or energetically, even whatever you're doing. And that's the point to me.
Yeah.
Okay, Daniel, what is it that you really want to ask me?
Well, yeah, I'm curious, based on just what you're saying now, how you engage these principles with inner conflict. You're speaking to applying them emotionally, for example.
I can tell you now, because things change, right? And that's one reason I I have been hesitant to be recorded.
Well, we're honored then.
Well, it's because it's like whatever I'm saying now, give me a year or two and it might be different. But people will think that this is who I am. It's like, hey, when I was 40 years old, I was a different person.
You have full permission to change your mind.
Thank you. So for me right now, it's important for me not to negate the human feelings. I like there's an old Zen story, I think it's Zen, of a Zen monk and a Hindu master walking along, leading to a river. And the Hindu master walks across on top of the river on the water. And the Zen master goes, 10 miles down the river, crosses over the bridge, comes back 10 miles, and they meet up again. And he said, that's how a human being crosses the water. and that story has really affected me. It's like, you don't want to negate your human feelings. Somebody does something nasty to you, you feel nasty back. You can get hurt or whatever. And so I don't want to stop feeling that. But it's like the horse and the rider. I want that to be the horse. And I want a stronger voice within me. You go, okay, feel that, but act this way. This is smarter. This is wiser. Mm-hmm. And usually it comes down to, well, what is it you really want to be doing in life? So I want a peaceful life. With some dynamic. I like throwing people around, as long as they get up smiling. Right? So then I can feel anger towards somebody and go, okay, that's human. I'm not going to negate that. But is that going to give me what I want? Is that going to give me a peaceful life? And then I'll often be able to do what's appropriate. It's like there's an old saying that I learned a long time ago is, if you want to continue a conversation, disagree. So there's an element of that in Aikido. It's like there's an agreement, there's a joining with, so you can stop the conversation. But if I disagree, then I'm perpetuating the conversation. Doesn't mean I have to internally think they're right. It's just, well, they're right about something. That's how they're feeling right now. They're right about that. That's where I can join them.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this is a good lead-in, in that little introduction. It named some of your initiatives through the years and the things that you've worked on in seminar workshops. And the company name was Wise Actions. And then some of the seminars that you would lead were Warrior of the Heart. And one that I didn't mention was The Art of Hosting. And I wonder if everything that we're talking about is exemplified by those very things: wise actions, being a warrior of the heart, the art of hosting. Maybe you can talk about some of what you would do in those seminars and what they were and how the principles played out there.
So I was doing 3 or 4 different kinds of things, and I needed a business name to combine them all. And so I made Wise Actions to do that. And actually, that's one of the few things that have survived all the years. So in one way, you could say it's all Aikido practice. I would say that, because I have a really broad view of that. So Art of Hosting, the full title of that originally was Art of Hosting Important Questions. It was all running meetings and seminars through the process of questions. If you're a smart student, you know that you can run the class by asking the right questions. You can choose the direction.
As I discovered in my first year of teaching.
Yeah.
The students were running me.
If you're a wise teacher, then you agree with the ones that you don't want to continue on, and you disagree with the direction you want to go. And so that's Aikido also, in this broad view of things. I don't know. I lost track of your question, Denver.
I think it was Nathaniel's question.
Yeah, it's just that I just think that all that we've been talking about, these Aikido principles, were playing out in the different kind of seminars that you've been leading through the years. And I'm thinking of one great story where I can't remember, you were engaged to come do a Warrior of the Heart seminar, and you brought lots of bokken, wood swords. And I think it was by maybe an indigenous tribe, and an elder had invited you to work with the young men. But she had an interesting plan, and it all played out in an interesting way. Do you remember this story?
Yeah. So this was with the Mi'kmaq people in Nova Scotia. So two things happened with that at that time. That's really important. First one was that was art of hosting, and a lot of the art of hosting is meeting in circle. So there's nobody at the head of the room often. If you're the leader, you just join the circle, and then you manage from within. So we were trying to do a circle, and there was an older man. Also, all the attendants were young men. I think so. There might have been a couple of younger women, but it was for the youth. And these were teenagers and maybe young 20s. And there was an older man watching, sort of like an elder in the tribe or something. And he was watching. And then one of the rules of the circle is you're not allowed to participate in the circle unless you sit in the circle, unless you join in. And he wasn't. He didn't want to join in. He was offered. He wanted to sit back and watch and then speak up once in a while. And so it was a little disruptive to how we held the circle. And in the art of hosting, you work as a team. So I could do this. I got up and I invited him out to talk to him on the porch. I wanted to get him out of the room because it was being a little disruptive. And we ended up talking, but genuinely talking. He told me, about his wife, and she had had cancer and was pregnant at the same time and had to delay cancer treatment. And deep heart stuff. I think because I was truly willing to listen. There's a real gift in listening to people, in like genuine listening. And then we spent the whole rest of the time out on the porch talking. And then at the end, he said, you're the first white man I've ever really talked to for 20 years. And I thought, wow, that's part of why I'm here. Not that being a white man, but just another person that's not part of his culture could listen. And I didn't offer advice. I was just listening.
Mm-hmm.
So that happened. But the person who really organized it was an older woman. I forgot she had a PhD in something. And she was a member of the community. She invited us to do this. And then it turned out I think she wanted opportunities to teach the younger people the traditional things of her culture, ceremonial, spiritual things. And I got the feeling they wouldn't listen to that normally. But with a little sword practice, young men and swords and being able to be listened to and sitting in a circle, that was working. But she would always she would let us do something and then come up with, because this happened or somebody got angry or something happened. Okay, we need to do a pipe ceremony. So the next morning we do the pipe ceremony. Then she'd let us do something. And then at the end of the day, well, because this came up, we need to do a fire ceremony. And then every day it's something. And I caught on that she's given us half the time and she's taken half the time to do what she wants to teach. And I thought, that's fine with me. Two things. It's good for the people. And I get to see these teachings unfiltered. She's speaking to her own people. So it's not like nothing's held back. And I get to be there. Well, how good is that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the willingness to join in too and blend in and to fit. That's right? Okay, this is what's going on. That's not what we're hired for. That's not why we're here. But it really was. It was just unspoken. I was proud of myself. I thought, okay, this is what we need to be doing. So that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
If you're enjoying the episode, please consider subscribing to our Patreon to help support the production of the podcast.
Subscriptions begin at $1. All patrons receive access to bonus content, curated resources, and exclusive patron events, including live Q&As.
For more information, please check out the Patreon link in the show notes, and thanks for listening.
There's a question, too, that comes up around Aikido, around effectiveness and power. that is related to I and Ki, the harmonizing and the energy. And it's hard to explain to somebody else that hasn't experienced the effectiveness of it. But when I was first training, I was lucky enough to have another teacher that was, more similar to you, who was very interested in the effective use of centering oneself and the principles of using center to be effective. So just as an example, I might take the wrist of this person, and he could do a very subtle response that might set me on my backside just through the connection of my hand holding his wrist and a very subtle movement that he would make, but with a particular internal focus. And for those who've not met Bob-san is particularly skilled at reading energy without touching somebody, and with a hand on, reading even better. And you've come from two schools of Aikido, or two lineages of Aikido, that are known for, one for a lot of energetic practice and knowing how to use energy, and another one that is really known for effective use of power. So how do you understand the harnessing of Ki and harmonizing it with actions that become an effective use of power? What do you understand as the principles underneath that and the use of that power?
So the first thing that comes up is a saying from Sensei, the founder of Aikido. I'm not going to get it exactly, but it's something like, I stand in front of my enemy, but it's already too late. I'm in the flow of the universe and cannot be beaten. So being in the flow of the universe, to me, is a way of saying, it's not just you. And if you think of all the really important spiritual teachers and martial art, the old guys that practice their whole life, I think they all say it. It's not me.
Right.
I'm allowing something to flow through me.
Mm-hmm.
And so with a horse and rider example, it's like you get a good trained horse, but once you train the horse, then you can start trusting the horse to go in the right direction. To me, that's a step towards that being in the flow, because when you're riding a horse, you're deciding where to go. But if something unusual happens, and the horse is well trained, then you trust their reaction to it. That's not exactly in the flow, but as you start studying being in the flow of the universe, whatever that means. But I think that means letting the power of the universe, or letting the power of spirit, work through you. Then you're not always right. It doesn't always come out. That's why you learn how to roll, how to fall. But as you get it, it starts becoming more and more. So you said I was good at reading energy, and there's part of me that wants to say, yes, I am. And there's another part of saying, that's not just me. And I'm aware at my best, maybe I'm 80%. So there's always, I could not be accurate with this. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
When I start thinking I'm 100% right all the time, I think I'm lost. And that might be part of being in the flow of the universe too, is realizing sometimes your choices were wrong at the time. I made a few choices in my life that I think, looking back, I think, I'm a little embarrassed about that. It's like, I could have done that better. But then I also think, well, look how much I learned. Would I change that? Would I give up that learning that I have now? Those screw-ups that maybe weren't screw-ups? I just a few months ago kind of fell down a little cliff and took some air at the end. And I broke 9 ribs.
Mm.
It was an amazing moment. It was like, I think I landed pretty good. I didn't break my neck. I didn't break my legs. I just broke a few ribs.
Yeah, just a few ribs.
Yeah. But the neat thing about ribs is no matter how much they're broken, you just live with them. They knit together because they're all covered with muscle. and tissue. But then after that, I started, and there's more to this story, but after that, I started dreaming about butterflies.
Mm.
And how is a butterfly born? It breaks open the cocoon it's been in. And I thought, what is this? 9 out of 12 ribs on one side. That's so like, I'm breaking out of a cocoon here with my life, something. It's like, would I change that? At this point, I'm thinking, yeah, I would rather not have done that. But at the same time, I'm getting enough distance and enough following. Maybe that's breaking me loose. It's like my first thought was I could die. And then I realized I wasn't. But the thought was that. And then sort of like, okay, I'm 72 years old. And maybe it's time to shed this last cocoon here that keeps me bound up. Maybe it's time to spread my wings a little bit or a lot. So it's like things in life happen, and it's sort of, it's like, yeah, I would rather not have done that, but now looking back a little bit more, maybe that was exactly the best thing that happened. So I'm not sure the question, but that's what came.
No, I mean, that's important. I was asking about what is it to harness and harmonize power? And that's an interesting question. And in Aikido, it means to what end are you harnessing power? That's an important part of Aikido. It's not Aikido. So that was one of the things I was bringing up. And there are principles at work. There are mental adjustments, and I'm not even sure mental is the right word. There are structural principles in terms of the actual body alignment, and they all kind of work together to be effective power, and that's considered part of Aikido, and yet it's still not Aikido unless that power is effectively harnessed to the right kind of end. And that was part of the question, like what is involved in this?
So Aikido is a martial art. I use it mostly to live a good life, right? But it's a martial art too. You can't lose that connection, that it's connected with a life and death struggle,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was taught, don't compete, just win. No, don't compete. Just, I'm going to win. That's sort of the martial view, because if you're in a fight, an engagement like that, physically, then you should only be in it if it's life and death for you or somebody else, right? Then don't compete. Don't try to do good. Just be in it and just win. That's the harsh reality. And I believe it's important in Aikido that you stay connected with that. That's the harsh. When you practice with swords, you're practicing on some level cutting somebody's head off. Now, would I ever want to do that? Absolutely not. In life, maybe if you're a manager and you fire somebody, it's like cutting their head off emotionally. But I think it needs to still be effective as a martial art. And there's a balance there. I had a teacher tell me, and this was when I was studying Aikido, like 6 days a week, practicing. Almost always in the evening, 2-3 classes, and sometimes in the morning. A lot of practice, but I was in. And at that point, the teacher said to me, if you're studying Aikido, it'll take you about 2 years of practice before you get better at fighting. He said, you'll get worse. You'll get worse in these 2 years, so don't think you're going to be great. You're going to be worse. And another teacher would say, if you find yourself in a fight, just fight, because you're not doing Aikido. And if you try to, you'll be a step or two behind what's going on, and you won't be in it. So both of this kind of advice would be in what you're in. Some of these sound like conflicting things. With wisdom, you got to be able to hold more than one view at the same time. You got to hold, this is about fighting, but you shouldn't be fighting to do it right. But I think that connection with the martial art is one of the things that really informs the power of the practice. And the same thing with Tai Chi, I think. Tai Chi is like a very soft internal practice that it is a martial art also, or part of a martial art. Depends on how you hold it. So I think you got to keep that connection, that your practice is a life and death practice. And then you go and you practice being peaceful and subtle and supple and all of that. But that root of it, I think, is really important. So you keep coming back to the power. I know I use the word power too, because that's what it's about. It's about the right application of power. And power is kind of a nasty word. Then I see some people on YouTube saying it's all about power. I thought, boy, are you wrong? Because it's not that power. It's power to give a gift. It's power to say what's in your heart. It's the power to move aside. It's the power to join in with something, with somebody that you're repulsed by. That's a powerful act. All of that. So maybe a big part of this practice too is not only being able to hold two thoughts at the same time as true, but maybe three or four or more. Does that answer some?
Yeah, I just think it's always worth talking about because, power just exists. It's in manipulating anything, picking anything up, moving anything around. Power is being used. So it becomes this question in a martial art like Aikido or in Tai Chi that, one, can you use it effectively? And then to what end? And I think the martial aspect has been very important to me in the Aikido. You could do the movements like a dance, and some people do, and they're elegant and beautiful. And if that's what you're into, that's fine. It makes a wonderful choreography and flow of movement and maybe a flow of being. I think some people are surprised when they watch you and I practice. We tend to strike hard with the swords. And even, you'll insist that I come close to your temple if I'm striking. And if I don't, I'll get the criticism for it, for not actually intending the strike. And
not criticism, it's an evaluation of your performance.
Yes, it is. It's definitely an evaluation of my performance. And I'll get an evaluation for underperforming. And I watch people be surprised at the intensity. But you might say, if you're going to hit me on purpose. And that's not a problem. If you hit me on accident, that's the problem. And so that speaks to being fully participatory, engaged at a high level, but then there's an element of control. Can I strike hard and yet still be in control? And I think in this way, this martial art, and I think Tai Chi also, is a lot about consciousness, where some people are so identified with, say, a punch or a strike of any sort that they've put their whole being into it, and there's no room to make a choice anymore. And here, there's actually the martial art is developing a center wherein there are many, many choices in a very tight situation. Whereas for most people, there are fewer and fewer choices in a tight situation. And so in this internal martial art question that Daniel is bringing up, it feels like you're building a lot of space in tight situations. And I think that that's kind of where the magic is in this for me, to be very engaged and not lose myself.
Yeah. Well, there's different definitions what peace is, right?
Yeah.
So to me, you're talking about being in peace. But I like peace with intensity. I mean, sometimes I like peace where I just kind of hang out and like just chill. But in the practice, it's like I like expressing peace with the greatest intensity that I can. And the reason I egg you on is for my own practice too. It's like, okay, I get to practice too. How much intensity can I stand?
Yeah.
And I'd like to say something about Tai Chi. Not that I know a lot, but some. With the Tai Chi, there's an intensity of relaxation too that I think is there. And I'm reminded, I've been doing It's called AcuDetox. It's acupuncture in the needle, in the ears. So I got certified in that, and I've been helping to do that. And there was one guy that had gotten the needles, and next time he said, I don't know if I want to do this. It relaxed me too much. I was really uneasy with the relaxation. It was like, it made me too peaceful. And I thought, he's not practiced at dealing with the intensity of peace and relaxation. It's an odd thought, but peace has its own intensity. So, I know what you're saying, Natano, and I love that too. It's like I'll sometimes intentionally shock people with saying, well, I love throwing people across the room. And I do. They got to know how to roll. And people who do, they're great fun to practice with. Or with you, it's like, you have enough control. We can do that intensity. If you didn't, I wouldn't let you. I couldn't trust you. But to get people you can trust practicing intensity is great. So like with meditation or with Tai Chi, I think it has its own form of intensity that maybe we're not used to. Mm-hmm. And that too is practicing with intensity.
I feel a question bubbling from Daniel.
Not exactly a question. I'm just mindful of time and think we need to move slowly towards a closing. But just everything you're saying, I keep thinking about this Tai Chi principle of the 3 fears that one is to overcome through the practice, which is the fear of loss, the fear of change, and the fear of ferocity or intensity. And so I think what you're saying is right about a certain kind of intensity of relaxation, but it's in a similar way to Aikido. It is how to relax deeply in an incredibly intense or ferocious environment. And what you're talking about in terms of life or death situations or intense martial kind of practice, that's less so a part of the direct Tai Chi practice. Like when we do push hands, it still is meant to be fairly gentle and yet not always. And when you're actually in a kind of conflict, that push hands is a kind of artificial situation to create that conflict. All of a sudden, you find all the gaps in your relaxation, and you might be able to be very relaxed doing the form on your own. And as soon as you're locked with somebody who's trying to push you over, you tighten back up. And so that practice of engaging with ferocity as a means of cultivating relaxation is really important, and to put yourself into situations of intensity in a practice setting so that when you're in a real life setting, not necessarily a physical altercation, but any kind of real life setting that has a kind of intensity, like you were speaking about a manager having to fire somebody, it's a certain kind of intensity. How do you do that in a skillful and relaxed way? And you have to have practice. But I guess with that said, I'm curious if you guys have any closing thoughts, and if not, Wing Sensei, if you have something to close us out with, like a poem or quote or something. But I don't want to rush us off if you do have any closing thoughts before then, or summation points.
No, maybe the best conversation, there is no summation. The best conversations you leave with it still going on. ... Yeah. So maybe that's my closing thought, which is just the opposite of what it was saying. We're human beings. We got to live with things all make sense. So I had a couple of things that I thought I could say. Passage about listening to the trees. And then there's the one I really wanted to say, so I get to.
You are allowed to.
You are the sensei.
Ask the beasts of the field, and they shall teach you, and the fowls of the air, and they shall tell you. Speak to the earth, and it shall teach you, and the fishes of the sea shall declare unto you. I really like that, because a lot of people miss that even in the Bible, it's talking about fish and animals and trees speaking to. Mm-hmm. So it's a recognition of the consciousness there. Mm-hmm. I really like that. But my most favorite one lately was Hafiz. I may have told this to you, or you know it, Nakano. But It goes, ever since happiness heard your name, it's been running through the streets trying to find you.
Amen.
Beautiful. Amen.
So don't forget that.
Shout out to friend of the show, Treefort of Golden Turtle Sound, for producing the intro and outro music and assisting with mixing and mastering. Be sure to check out his awesome music and hit up Golden Turtle Sound for any of your audio engineering needs.